Why was no one listening when Sergeant Donovan screamed for a sniper? The artillery fire was tearing through everything. Alpha platoon pinned down, outnumbered. 12 soldiers left from 23 that morning. The hilltop position at Ember Ridge was collapsing, and every second that passed, the enemy closed in. 300 meters, then 250. The mortar rounds shook the ground beneath their boots, and the thunderous crack of incoming fire made thinking impossible. But Donovan was thinking. He had to. He was in command, and command meant watching your soldiers die if you made the wrong call. He crouched behind the damaged communication station, blood streaming from a cut above his eyebrow, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Turner, status on our radio. Dead, Sarge," Corporal Jake Turner shouted back, ducking as bullets sparked off metal beside him. "Everything's fried, we're cut off. No radio, no air support, no reinforcements coming." The tactical situation was deteriorating faster than Donovan could process. Intelligence had failed them spectacularly. What was supposed to be a lightly defended observation post had turned into a coordinated assault by battle-hardened professionals. These weren't conscripts stumbling through the smoke. These were soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. Their flanking left, someone yelled. Donovan risked a glance over the ridge. His stomach dropped. Enemy infantry advancing in coordinated fire teams, using proper bounding overwatch, moving like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Alpha platoon had no heavy weapons, no way to call for help, and in less than 10 minutes the enemy would be close enough to overrun their position entirely. "We need to thin them out before they get within grenade range," Donovan said, more to himself than anyone else. His mind raced through options. Direct engagement would be suicide. Retreat meant exposing their backs. They needed precision fire. They needed distance. They needed someone who could change the momentum of this fight with a single shot. "Any snipers here?" The words exploded from his throat, raw and desperate. Silence answered him. Well, not silence. The continuous roar of combat, but no human voice responded. The soldiers around him exchanged helpless glances. Most were riflemen, machine gunners, a couple of grenadiers. Standard infantry, not a designated marksman in the bunch. Donovan felt the crushing weight of command settle on his shoulders. In less than 10 minutes, his soldiers would die because he couldn't produce a miracle. Because there was no one qualified to make the shots that needed to be made. "Sergeant," the voice was so quiet he almost missed it. Donovan turned. In the corner of the trench, partially hidden behind a stack of ammunition crates, stood Private Lee Hart. She'd been transferred to Alpha from logistics support just 4 days ago. Quiet girl, kept to herself, did her work without complaint. He'd barely spoken 10 words to her. She was looking at him now with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not fear, not eagerness, something else entirely. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Hart," Donovan said, confusion cutting through his urgency. Get down before, but she wasn't getting down. She was reaching for her military pack, the oversized one that had seemed oddly heavy when she'd arrived. Her movements were deliberate, methodical. She pulled the pack in front of her and began unlacing it with steady fingers. The soldiers nearest to her stopped what they were doing, watching. There was something about the way she moved, like she'd done this before. Like she was preparing for something they couldn't yet understand. Lee's hands moved with practiced efficiency. She peeled back layers of carefully arranged gear, not the random jumble of a typical soldier's pack, but organized with almost surgical precision. And there, cushioned in foam padding, was a rifle case. She drew it out. Black polymer, reinforced hinges, military-grade locks. "Hart, what the hell?" Donovan started. She opened the case. Even in the chaos of combat, several soldiers audibly gasped. Nestled inside was an M1-7 Barrett 50 caliber anti-material rifle. But this wasn't a standard issue weapon. The barrel had been customized with a specialized muzzle brake. The scope was a Schmidt and Bender, 5 to 25 by 56, with ballistic turrets that looked hand-calibrated. The entire weapon showed signs of meticulous maintenance, not the kind you learned in basic logistics training. "Where did you get that?" Turner breathed. Lee didn't answer. She was already performing a functions check, her movements fluid and automatic, chamber clear, bolt smooth, scope mounts tight. She reached back into her pack and withdrew a magazine loaded with Raufoss rounds, armor-piercing explosive ammunition. Donovan's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Logistics personnel didn't carry Barrett rifles. They didn't have access to specialized ammunition. They certainly didn't handle a $50,000 weapon system like they'd been born with it in their hands. Art, he said slowly. Who are you? She looked up at him. For just a moment he saw something flash in her eyes, grief maybe, or regret. Then it was gone, replaced by cool calculation. Someone who can help, she said, if you let me. Another mortar round impacted 30 meters away, showering them with debris. A soldier screamed. The enemy was advancing. Donovan made his decision. Do it, he said. Lee nodded once. She settled the rifle across the sandbags, adjusting the bipod with minute precision. Her entire demeanor had changed. The quiet, unassuming logistics clerk was gone. In her place was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. The transformation was immediate and complete. Lee moved to a reinforced section of the defensive wall, selecting her firing position with an expert's eye. She needed good sight lines, structural support for the rifle's recoil, at least 2 escape routes in case her position was compromised. The spot she chose, between 2 concrete barriers near the eastern edge, met all 3 criteria. Several soldiers watched her with open confusion. Since when does logistics know how to handle a Barrett? Private Dan Reeves whispered. That's not standard issue either, Corporal Sarah Kim added. Look at that scope. That's at least $5,000 in custom optics. Donovan moved closer, positioning himself where he could observe both Lee and the approaching enemy. Up close, he noticed details he'd missed before. The rifle case bore scuff marks that suggested years of field use. The weapon itself, despite its immaculate condition, showed the subtle wear patterns of a tool that had seen extensive service. And Lee's hands. They moved with the unconscious precision of thousands of hours of practice. She extended the bipod legs, adjusted the cant, and settled behind the scope with the comfortable intimacy of someone returning to a familiar place. Her breathing immediately changed. Deep, controlled respirations that would minimize movement during the shot. Hart, Donovan said quietly, I need to know what I'm working with here. What's your real background? Lee's eye remained pressed to the scope, tracking movement downrange. Does it matter right now, Sergeant? It matters if I'm about to trust my soldiers' lives to someone I don't know. For a moment she went still. Then, without moving from her firing position, she spoke. Her voice was steady, clinical. 2 years ago, I was part of an operator training program, specialized marksmanship division. Shadow Line Unit. Donovan felt his blood run cold. Shadow Line. He'd heard rumors, whispers in officer briefings about an ultra-classified sniper program that operated in denied areas, soldiers who could hit targets at extreme ranges, who carried out elimination missions that officially never happened. You're saying you're a Shadow Line operator. Then why are you here, attached to a regular infantry platoon hauling supplies? Because I quit, Lee said. Her voice carried an edge now, something sharp and painful. I walked away from the program 2 years ago, requested transfer to logistics. They let me go on the condition I never talk about it, never use those skills again. So why are you using them now? Because, she said softly, people are about to die, and I'm 3 years past caring about my own rules. Before Donovan could respond, Lee's finger tightened on the trigger. The Barrett roared. The massive rifle kicked back against its bipod, but Lee absorbed the recoil with practiced ease, already working the bolt for the next shot. Downrange, an enemy machine gun position simply ceased to exist. The gunner's body jerked backward and the weapon fell silent. The soldiers of Alpha Platoon stared. That was 800 meters, someone whispered. She just made an 800-meter shot like it was nothing. Lee was already tracking her next target. She'd identified the enemy's command element. 3 officers coordinating the assault from a protected position behind a rock formation. Take out the leadership, disrupt the coordination. Basic counter-assault doctrine. Her second shot rang out. One of the officers dropped. The others scattered, but Lee was faster. Third shot. Fourth shot. Both hits. The enemy advance faltered. Without their commanders issuing orders, the infantry teams lost cohesion. "She's changing the battle," Turner said, his voice filled with awe. "She's actually changing the momentum." Donovan watched, transfixed. In less than 2 minutes, Lee had eliminated 4 high-value targets. The enemy forces, moments ago confident and aggressive, were now confused and hesitant. Their coordinated assault was fragmenting into isolated groups, easier to defend against. But Lee wasn't done. She shifted her aim to the enemy's heavy weapons positions. A mortar team. A recoilless rifle crew. Each one posed a lethal threat to Alpha Platoon. Each one required precise fire to neutralize, and Lee delivered that precision with cold efficiency. The Barrett thundered again and again. Each shot carefully aimed, each shot a kill. The soldiers around her had stopped fighting and started watching. They'd never seen anything like this. This wasn't suppressive fire or lucky shots. This was surgical, professional. This was a master at work. "How many rounds do you have?" Donovan asked. Lee ejected an empty magazine, loaded a fresh one. "Enough," she said, but there was something in her voice, a tremor, almost imperceptible, but there. Donovan looked closer at her face. Her expression was calm, focused, but her eyes held something darker. Each time she fired, something shifted in them. Like she was counting, like each shot was adding to a weight she'd been carrying for a long time. "Trained you to shoot like that?" he asked. "A woman named Hannah," Lee said quietly. "She was the best sniper Shadow Line ever produced, taught me everything." "Where is she now?" Lee's jaw tightened. "Dead 3 years ago. She died because I was 3 seconds too slow making a shot that could have saved her." Donovan felt the air leave his lungs. "So that's what this is about." Lee fired again. Another enemy soldier fell. "That's what this has always been about, Sergeant. I quit because I couldn't carry the weight anymore. Couldn't handle knowing that every hesitation, every mistake meant someone died. But here's what I learned in logistics, pretending to be someone else. The weight doesn't go away. It just changes shape." Another shot. Another life ended. "You can run from who you are," she continued. "You can try to be someone different, someone quieter, someone who doesn't have to make those choices. But when the moment comes when people need you, you remember why you learned to carry that weight in the first place." The enemy advance had completely stalled. The soldiers who moments ago were closing in for the kill were now taking cover, terrified of the invisible death that picked them off one by one. Alpha Platoon rallied. With the enemy pinned down, they could return effective fire. The battle's momentum had shifted entirely, and it was all because of one quiet girl in the corner of a trench. One soldier who everyone had ignored until the moment she picked up a rifle and reminded them what precision really meant. But Lee knew something the others didn't, something that made her hands shake slightly as she loaded another magazine. This wasn't over, not even close. She'd studied the enemy's tactics while they advanced, recognized their formation. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were a hunter-killer team, and hunter-killer teams always had a counter-sniper element. Somewhere out there, someone was looking for her, someone trained just like she was. Someone who would be calculating her position right now based on her muzzle flash and the sound of her shots. "Sergeant," she said, not taking her eye from the scope, "I need you to listen very carefully. In about 90 seconds, my position is going to be compromised. They have a sniper team out there and they're good. They're going to put rounds on this location, and when they do, I need you to pull everyone back to the secondary defensive line." Donovan's face went pale. "What about you?" "I'll keep them busy. Buy you time to reposition." "That's suicide, Hart. That's tactical necessity," she corrected. "You can't hold this position against their numbers. You need to fall back to a more defensible location. I can cover your withdrawal, but only if you move now." The soldiers around them had gone quiet, listening. Private Reeves looked terrified. "We're not leaving you here," he said. "Yes," Lee replied calmly, "you are, because if you don't, everyone dies. If you do, most of you survive. The math is simple." Before Donovan could argue, Lee's prediction came true. A bullet cracked past her position, missing by inches. Then another. The enemy sniper had found her. "Contact!" Turner yelled, diving for cover. Lee didn't flinch. She was already tracking the source of the shots. There, a ridge position 1,100 meters out. She could see the faint glint of a scope in the afternoon sun. The enemy sniper was using a Russian-made rifle, probably an SVDK. Good weapon, good shooter, but not good enough. She adjusted for distance, wind, and elevation. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, everything else fell away. The chaos, the fear, the weight of 3 years of guilt. In this moment there was only the shot, only the calculation, only the tiny space between breath and trigger pull where decisions were made and lives were changed forever. The Barrett roared. 1,100 meters away, the enemy sniper's scope shattered. The shooter slumped forward. Lee worked the bolt, eyes already searching for the spotter. Found him, shifting position, panicking, second shot. The spotter fell. "She's insane," Kim whispered. "She just took out their counter-sniper team at over 1,000 meters while they were shooting at her." Donovan grabbed his radio handset even though it was dead. Habit. Then he grabbed Turner instead. "Start pulling everyone back. Quiet, organized. We move in two-man teams, covering fire from alternating positions." "Understood." Turner nodded, already moving. Within seconds the withdrawal began, professional, controlled, exactly the way they'd trained. But as each soldier fell back, they cast glances toward Lee. She remained at her position, alone, drawing enemy fire, buying them the seconds they needed to escape. Another bullet struck the concrete barrier beside her head. Chips of stone cut her cheek. She ignored it, returned fire. The enemy was getting desperate now. They'd lost their leadership, their heavy weapons, their sniper team, but they still had numbers. They were starting to realize that if they could eliminate her, they could still win this fight. And they were right. Lee checked her ammunition. 2 magazines left, 20 rounds. She'd need to make every single one count. She shifted position slightly, moving 3 feet to the left. A bullet struck where she'd been sitting half a second before. Good. They were committed now, focused entirely on her. Not watching the platoon withdraw, not securing their flanks, just trying to kill the one soldier who'd turned their easy victory into a nightmare. She could work with that. She could use that. She could turn their rage into a weapon against them. Another shot from her rifle. An enemy officer trying to rally his troops dropped mid-sentence. The soldiers near him scattered. Morale was breaking. You could see it in how they moved. Hesitant, afraid. No longer the confident professionals from 30 minutes ago. Now they were men who'd seen their invincible assault shattered by a single shooter. Men who were starting to realize that maybe they'd made a terrible mistake coming here today. "How's the withdrawal?" Lee called out, not taking her eye from the scope. "Almost clear." Donovan called back, 2 more minutes. Then something happened that Lee hadn't anticipated. The enemy, realizing they were losing, made a desperate play. They called in their own artillery. She heard the whistle first. That distinctive sound that every soldier learns to fear. Incoming rounds, not aimed at the fleeing platoon, aimed at her position. They were willing to drop artillery danger close to their own troops if it meant eliminating her. "Get down," someone screamed. Lee pressed herself against the concrete barrier. The world exploded. The first round hit 20 meters away, showering her with debris and dirt. The second round closer, 10 meters. The concussive force felt like being punched by a giant fist. Her ears rang. Blood trickled from her nose. The third round hit the observation tower directly behind her position. The structure, already damaged from earlier fighting, collapsed. Tons of concrete and steel came down. And Lee, pinned in her firing position, couldn't move fast enough to escape it. The debris buried her, crushed her against the defensive wall. Pain exploded through her ribs, her left arm. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except the ringing in her ears and her own heartbeat, fast and desperate. Is this it, she thought? Is this how it ends? Not from an enemy bullet, not from a fair fight. Just buried under rubble, suffocating slowly while the battle rages on above. She thought of Hannah, remembered her instructor's words from 3 years ago. "Every bullet changes the world," Hannah had said. "Sometimes in ways you'll never know. Sometimes in ways that will haunt you forever. The trick is learning to carry that knowledge. Learning to live with the weight of what you've done and what you've failed to do." Hannah had carried that weight for 15 years. Lee had tried to carry it for 6 months before breaking, before that mission, before the 3-second delay that cost Hannah her life. 3 seconds, that's how long Lee had hesitated. 3 seconds of doubt, of fear, of humanity getting in the way of the shot. And in those 3 seconds, the enemy had moved, had taken the shot themselves, had killed the woman who taught Lee everything about being a sniper and nothing about how to survive being one. She'd quit the next day, walked away from Shadow Line, requested transfer to the most boring, quiet, non-combat role she could find: logistics, paperwork, supply requisitions. Anything to never hold a rifle again. Anything to never have to make another shot that might cost someone their life. But here, buried under concrete and choking on dust, Lee realized something. Hannah wouldn't have wanted her to quit. Hannah would have wanted her to learn, to grow, to understand that the wait wasn't punishment, it was proof. Proof that you still cared. Proof that you were still human. Proof that every life mattered, even the ones you had to take to save others. The day the weight stops feeling heavy, Hannah had once said, is the day you need to walk away. Because that's the day you've stopped being a protector and become something else, something dangerous. Lee could still feel the weight. Even now, probably dying, she could feel it. Every shot she'd fired today, every enemy soldier she'd killed. She'd carry them all, but she'd also carry the 27 Alpha platoon soldiers who would live because she'd made those shots. The math was brutal. The math was unfair, but the math was real. She'd traded enemy lives for friendly lives, and she'd do it again. She'd do it every time, because that's what the weight meant. That's what being a sniper meant. Making impossible choices so others didn't have to. Above her she could hear voices, muffled, distant. Someone was calling her name, Donovan. The platoon was supposed to be gone by now, withdrawn to safety. Why was he still here, stupid, tactically unsound? Exactly the kind of thing that got good soldiers killed for no reason. She tried to call out, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate, tried to move, but the debris pinned her too completely. All she could do was lie there, broken, bleeding, and hope that whatever happened next, the platoon had made it out. Hope that her shots had mattered. Hope that Hannah, wherever she was, knew that her student had finally learned the most important lesson. Not how to shoot, but why it mattered. And that was everything. The voices were getting closer, hands moving rubble, soldiers working frantically to uncover her. How long had she been buried? Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning down here in the dark. Her consciousness drifted, fading in and out like a bad radio signal. She remembered fragments, the academy where she'd first met Hannah, a stern woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. You have steady hands, Hannah had said during Lee's evaluation, but steady hands aren't enough. I need to know if you can make the hard shots, the impossible shots, the shots that will keep you awake at night for years afterward. Lee had been 22, confident, naive. Of course I can, she'd said. Hannah had smiled, a sad smile. Ask me again in 5 years, she'd replied. Let's see if you still think it's that simple. It took less than 5 years for Lee to understand. It took exactly one mission, the operation in Kandahar province. Shadow Line's most classified assignment. The target was a high-value commander coordinating attacks across 3 districts. Intelligence had him pinned down in a compound. Hannah and Lee, operating as a team, were tasked with elimination. They'd set up in an abandoned building 800 meters from the target location. Hannah on primary, Lee on secondary, standard protocol. The senior shooter takes the shot. The junior provides backup and security. They'd waited for 6 hours, silent, patient, watching the compound through their scopes. Then at 1900 hours the target appeared. Hannah had him. Perfect shot. Clear line of sight. No civilians in the immediate area. She was about to fire when enemy patrol rounded the corner. 3 soldiers. Routine security sweep. They hadn't spotted the sniper position yet, but they would. In about 10 seconds, they'd be close enough to see Hannah's rifle barrel protruding from the window. Hannah had a choice. Take the shot on the primary target and risk being discovered by the patrol, or eliminate the patrol first and risk losing the primary target entirely. She'd made her decision in half a second. She shifted her aim to the patrol, fired 3 times. 3 bodies dropped, but the sound of gunfire alerted the compound. The primary target dove for cover, surrounded immediately by bodyguards. The window of opportunity closed. Mission failed, and that should have been the end of it. A tactical setback, an acceptable loss. These things happened in the field. Except the patrol Hannah had shot wasn't an enemy patrol. Intelligence had been wrong. They were local militia, friendly forces, allied soldiers who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. 3 men who died because a sniper made a split-second decision based on faulty information. Hannah had been devastated. She'd reported it immediately, took full responsibility. Command had cleared her, ruled it a justifiable engagement based on the information available. No charges filed. No disciplinary action. But Hannah had never forgiven herself. Lee had watched her instructor change after that, watched the weight settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Hannah started double-checking everything, triple-checking, hesitating before shots she would have taken without thought before. The confidence that made her the best had been replaced by caution, by fear, by the terrible knowledge that even the best training, the best intentions, couldn't prevent tragedy when the information was wrong. 6 months later, they were deployed again. Different target, different country, same mission parameters. This time Lee was on primary, Hannah on secondary. They'd found their target, clear shot, no complications. All Lee had to do was pull the trigger, but she'd hesitated, thought about the patrol, thought about Hannah's guilt, thought about all the ways this could go wrong. 3 seconds of hesitation. 3 seconds of being human instead of being a weapon. And in those 3 seconds, the enemy sniper Hannah had been watching, the one she'd warned Lee about, took his shot. The bullet entered Hannah's scope, traveled through the optic and struck her in the eye. Instant death. No suffering, no last words, just there 1 second, gone the next. Lee had completed the mission, eliminated the target, eliminated the enemy sniper, called in the extraction, did everything she was trained to do, but it didn't matter. Hannah was dead because Lee had been 3 seconds too slow. Because she'd thought instead of shot, because she'd been human. The weight had crushed her after that. The guilt, the rage, the impossible question of whether Hannah would have wanted her to take that shot without hesitation, without thought, without letting humanity interfere with the mission. Shadow Line had offered her counseling, offered her time off, offered her anything she needed to get back in the field, but Lee knew the truth. She couldn't carry the weight anymore. She'd broken under it, and broken tools had no place in precision operations. So she'd quit, walked away, spent 2 years pretending to be someone else, someone who didn't have to make those choices, someone who didn't have blood on her hands and nightmares in her sleep. It had almost worked, almost, until today, until Sergeant Donovan screamed for a sniper and Lee realized she could either stay buried in her past or step forward into her present. She'd chosen to step forward. And now here she was, literally buried, wondering if stepping forward had been a mistake after all. Heart, the voice was clearer now, close, Donovan's voice. She tried to respond but only managed a weak cough, blood in her mouth. Broken ribs probably, punctured lung maybe. The debris shifted above her. Light stabbed down, hands reaching, pulling away concrete chunks, soldiers working together. Then Donovan's face appeared above her, streaked with dirt and blood but alive. "You magnificent idiot," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You absolute magnificent idiot." "Did everyone make it?" Lee managed to whisper. 27 out of 28, Donovan said. "We lost Thompson to his wounds during the withdrawal, but everyone else," he shook his head, "everyone else is here because of you." Medics arrived, assessment began. Broken ribs confirmed, fractured left arm, concussion, severe contusions, but nothing immediately life-threatening. She'd live. She'd be in a hospital for weeks, face months of recovery, but she'd live. And somehow, buried under all that pain, Lee felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Relief. Not because she'd survived, but because the weight had shifted, changed shape, become something she could carry again. Hannah would be proud, she murmured. "What?" Donovan asked, leaning closer. "Nothing." Lee managed a small smile. "Just finishing something I started 3 years ago." As they prepared to move her to an evacuation vehicle, she looked back at the ruins of the observation tower. She'd made her stand there, held death ground against overwhelming odds, and survived. Not because she was faster or stronger or braver than Hannah, but because she'd finally learned what Hannah had been trying to teach her all along. The weight wasn't the problem. The weight was the point. It meant you still cared. It meant you were still human. It meant every shot mattered, every life mattered, every choice carried consequences you'd feel forever. And feeling those consequences, that wasn't weakness, that was strength. That was what separated soldiers from killers. That was what made the hard shots worth taking. Hannah had known that, had tried to show her, had died still carrying that knowledge. Lee understood now, finally, 3 years too late to save her instructor, but just in time to save herself. The medics lifted her onto the stretcher. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her broken body, but underneath the pain was something else. Something that felt almost like peace. She'd been 3 seconds too slow to save Hannah, but at Ember Ridge, facing down an entire enemy company, she'd been exactly on time. And that mattered. That changed everything. 3 weeks later, forward operating base Campbell. Lee sat in a hospital bed, her arm in a cast, her ribs still tightly wrapped. The concussion symptoms had mostly faded. The physical wounds were healing faster than expected. The other wounds, the ones that didn't show up on x-rays, those were different. But she was working on them, making progress, learning to carry the weight in a new way. The door opened. Donovan entered, now wearing a fresh uniform with new insignia. They'd promoted him for the action at Ember Ridge. He carried a folder under his arm. "You look better," he said. "I feel like I was hit by a truck," Lee replied. "But yeah, better than 3 weeks ago." Donovan sat in the chair beside her bed. For a moment they just looked at each other. Two soldiers who'd been through something extraordinary together. Two people who'd stared death in the face and somehow walked away. The kind of bond that couldn't be explained to anyone who hadn't been there. Who hadn't felt the ground shake, and the bullets snap, and the terrible knowledge that the next second might be your last. "Command wants to see you," Donovan said finally. "They've read all the reports, seen the battlefield assessments. They know what you did." "I did my job," Lee said quietly. "You saved 27 lives while holding off a reinforced enemy company alone. That's a bit beyond doing your job." He opened the folder. "They want you back in Shadow Line. Full reactivation. You'd have your pick of assignments, any team, any location, whatever you want." Lee had been expecting this. The military didn't let talent like hers retire to logistics without eventually trying to pull them back. And after Ember Ridge, after she demonstrated exactly what she was capable of, there was no way they'd let her fade into obscurity again. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then they'll respect your decision," Donovan said. "But they wanted me to deliver the offer personally." He paused. "What are you going to do?" He looked down at her hands, the same hands that had fired 43 shots that day, the same hands that had taken 43 lives to save 27. The mathematics was cold, clinical, but the weight was anything but. "Hannah told me once that every bullet changes the world," she said quietly. "I spent 3 years trying to forget that, trying to be someone who didn't carry that weight." She looked up. "But at Ember Ridge, I remembered something else," she said. She said the weight is proof we're human. Proof we care. The day it stops feeling heavy is the day we've lost something essential. "So I'm going to carry it," Lee continued. "But I'm going to choose what I'm carrying it for." She met Donovan's eyes. "Tell command I'll come back, but on my terms. I don't want to be a ghost anymore. No more black ops. No more missions that officially never happened. If I'm going to do this, I want to know who I'm protecting and why." Donovan smiled. "They anticipated you might say that. There's a new program, training the next generation of precision marksmen. Teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to carry the weight. They want you to lead it." Teaching, passing on Hannah's lessons, making sure the next generation understood both the power and the responsibility, making sure they knew the difference between being a sniper and being a killer, making sure they carried the weight with dignity instead of letting it crush them the way it had almost crushed her. "I accept," she said. "Good," Donovan stood. "Oh, and one more thing. The soldiers from Alpha have been asking about you nonstop. They want to visit if you're up for it." "All of them, every single one," Donovan confirmed. "You're kind of their hero now." "I'm not a hero," Lee said. You just held death ground against impossible odds to save people you barely knew," Donovan interrupted. "You just made shots that will be taught in sniper schools for decades. You just became exactly the kind of legend Hannah was." His expression softened. "Whether you like it or not, you matter to them, to me, to everyone who'll hear this story." "Hannah would tell me I'm being an idiot again," Lee said, but she was smiling now. "Probably," Donovan agreed. but she'd also tell you to accept it with grace and move forward. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Hey, Hart, yeah, that day at the ridge, when you were in the tower, you could have followed us, could have withdrawn with the platoon when you had the chance. Why did you stay? Lee thought about how to answer, about 3-second delays and 3-year regrets, about bullets that change the world and weights that prove we're human, about a woman named Hannah who taught her that sometimes the hardest choices are the most necessary ones. Because she said finally, I wasn't 3 seconds too slow anymore. I was exactly on time, and that mattered. Donovan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once with profound respect. Welcome back, Reaper. After he left, Lee sat alone in the quiet hospital room. Outside, the sun was setting over the base, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Tomorrow, she'd begin physical therapy. Next month, she'd start her new assignment. Next year, she'd train soldiers who might one day face their own impossible choices. But today, she just sat and watched the sunset. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight she carried didn't feel quite so crushing. It felt like purpose. 6 months later, sniper training facility, Fort Harrison. Instructor Hart stood before a class of 23 students, all of them eager, nervous, completely unprepared for what she was about to teach them. She recognized that eagerness, had worn it herself once. Young and confident and certain they could handle anything the instructors threw at them. They had no idea, not yet, but they would. That's what this training was for, not just to teach them how to shoot, but to teach them what shooting meant. Precision marksmanship isn't about guns, she began. It's not about bullets or ballistics or how steady your hands are. It's about decisions, split-second choices that you'll carry for years. She paused, letting that sink in, watching their faces. Some looked confused, some looked skeptical. Good. Skepticism meant they were thinking. Every shot you take changes the world in ways you can't always see, she continued. Sometimes it saves lives, sometimes it costs them. You'll never know which until long after the bullet has left the barrel. All you can do is trust that you're doing more good than harm. One student raised her hand, a young woman who reminded Lee of herself at that age. Dark hair pulled back tight, serious eyes, the kind of focus that came from wanting desperately to prove yourself. How do you carry that weight, ma'am? The student asked. How do you keep going when every shot matters so much? Lee thought of Hannah, thought of Ember Ridge, thought of 43 shots and 27 lives and the difference between 3 seconds too slow and exactly on time. You carry it, she said simply, by remembering why it's heavy. The day it stops weighing on you is the day you need to put down the rifle and walk away. But as long as you feel it, as long as it matters, she smiled slightly. Then you know you're still human, still capable of doing good, still worth the trust people place in you. She picked up her rifle, the same M107 from that day, repaired and restored, still carrying the scuff marks from when the tower collapsed on her. She'd refused to have them buffed out, wanted the reminder, wanted the proof that she'd been there, done that, survived it. Now she said, let's talk about wind reading, because understanding wind is the difference between a perfect shot and 3 seconds too slow. The students leaned forward, ready to learn, notebooks out, pens ready, eager to absorb every detail. They had no idea how much they didn't know, how much they'd have to learn not from lectures but from experience, from mistakes, from the terrible moment when theory became reality, and they realized that targets had faces and families and futures they were erasing with a single trigger pull. But they'd learn, the same way Lee had learned, the same way Hannah had learned before her, through fire and blood and the weight that never quite went away. And when they learned, when they finally understood what it meant to be a sniper, they'd have someone who'd been there before, someone who knew the weight, someone who could teach them not just how to carry it, but why it mattered. In a hospital room 3 years ago, in the memory of a tower that no longer stood, in the echo of words spoken by a woman who would never be forgotten, Hannah would have smiled, because her student had finally learned the most important lesson, not how to shoot, but why it mattered, and that was everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Sometimes strength isn't loud or obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, waiting for the moment when it's needed most. And sometimes a silent girl in the corner of a trench, ignored and underestimated, draws a sniper rifle and changes the entire battle. Not because she wants glory, not because she needs recognition, but because people need help, because lives hang in the balance, because someone has to make the hard shots, carry the heavy weight, and live with the consequences. That's what Hannah had understood. That's what Lee had learned. And that's what she would teach to every student who walked through her classroom door. The weight was proof you cared. The weight was proof you were human. The weight was the price of power, the cost of precision, the burden of being someone others could count on when everything else failed. And if you carried it with dignity, with honor, with the understanding that every life mattered, yours and theirs and the ones you saved and the ones you took, then the weight became something else. It became purpose. It became meaning. It became the difference between existing and living, between surviving and thriving, between being a weapon and being a warrior. Lee looked at her students, saw their eager faces, saw their innocence, saw the people they were before the weight settled on their shoulders. She couldn't protect them from that weight, couldn't spare them the nights they'd lie awake remembering faces through scopes, couldn't prevent the moment when they'd realize that every shot they fired echoed forever, but she could prepare them, could teach them, could show them how to carry it with grace instead of letting it crush them. That's all Hannah had ever wanted for her, to carry the weight and not break under it, to understand that being human wasn't weakness, that feeling the consequences of your actions wasn't failure, that the day the weight stopped feeling heavy was the day you needed to walk away because you'd lost the thing that made you worth trusting with a rifle in the first place. Your humanity, your conscience, your soul. Lee had almost lost those things, had spent 3 years trying to bury them under logistics paperwork and supply requisitions, had tried to pretend she was someone else, someone who didn't have to make impossible choices, someone who could sleep at night without seeing Hannah's face, someone who could forget what it felt like to hold death ground and know that every second counted and every shot mattered and every decision you made would ripple forward through time in ways you'd never fully understand. But at Ember Ridge, buried under concrete and choking on dust, she'd found those things again. Her humanity, her purpose, her reason for carrying the weight. And now, standing in front of students who would one day face their own Ember Ridge, their own impossible choices, their own 3-second delays that changed everything, she could pass on what Hannah had given her. Not just skills, not just techniques, but wisdom, understanding. The knowledge that being a sniper meant being human first and a weapon second. The class continued. Wind reading, ballistics, range estimation, all the technical skills they'd need. But woven through every lesson, every example, every story Lee told was the deeper truth, the one Hannah had taught her, the one she'd learned in blood and pain and sacrifice. That precision marksmanship wasn't about being the best shot. It was about being trusted with power and using it wisely. About understanding that every bullet changed the world and making sure those changes moved toward good instead of evil. That's what separated snipers from killers. That's what made the weight worth carrying. That's what turned individual soldiers into legends that would be told in training facilities for decades. Not because they were the fastest or the strongest or the most skilled, but because they understood, because they cared, because when the moment came they were exactly on time, and sometimes that made all the difference.